Hello everybody, welcome along. This is Space Dave Live, episode number 22. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is lovely to have everyone here with us, including our live studio audience. Welcome along everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. Every week I'm thinking this will be the week that we'll have no one show up, and every week someone does. So it's really awesome having you guys here. And you can see over there we have got Ange and Floyd, who are both helping out as our production assistants tonight. And we're going to be trying something just very slightly different with them tonight, but we'll talk about that very shortly. In the meantime, let's have a look at our program and see what we've got in store tonight. So, pretty straightforward again, as it has been recent weeks. We've got it's mostly news again tonight. We've got some launches to talk about, including, of course, the Rocket Lab launch, some updates with NASA, a bit of news from Mars and Jupiter, and just a few other little bits and pieces. So, the competition tonight, let's talk about that. The competition, this is it's kind of straightforward. Should we nuke Mars? Should we send nuclear bombs to Mars and drop them on Mars? Seems like a fairly straightforward question, doesn't it? If you're wondering what that's all about, we will be talking about that a little bit later in the show. You may have heard this whole idea about dropping bombs on Mars or in the atmosphere of Mars to try and help terraform Mars. But we will talk about that later. In the meantime, if you've got an opinion on it already, just go for your life. As always, to enter, write your answer with the word comp at the start, space, colon space, and then your answer. And if you like, tell us a little bit about why you think we should or should not drop nuclear bombs on our neighbouring planet. Now, while we're talking about the competition, a quick update. Someone asked last week, and I missed the question, sorry about that, what was the result of the Lego build? You remember a few weeks ago we had Floyd and his friend Cullen were building that Lego stuff, and we had a competition. How long would it take them to do it? So one of the things we wanted to look out for was who did actually get the closest. So I looked on the videos and I added it up, and it was actually 2 hours and 4 minutes to do the whole build. And the person who got closest with a guess of 2 hours was Vienna. Well done, Vienna. I hope you're watching the show tonight. You were just 4 minutes off, so very well done. We had quite a few guesses, but yours was the closest. So that was the competition stuff. Quick mention of our Patreon page, of course. If you'd like to help support the show, that's how you do it. You go to patreon.com/Space Center and give us lots of money, or contact us for other things that you can do. There's lots of things that you can do to support us. It doesn't have to be money. In particular, if you can like the videos, subscribe on YouTube, do sharing and all of that kind of stuff. Any kind of commenting, all of that sort of stuff does make a difference and helps us out. And this week, with our Patreon, we do have a couple of new supporters on board, and we need to thank Tristan and James Illich. Familiar faces, they've been quite active in watching the show before. Thank you so much, guys. Really awesome to have you part of our support team. Thank you for that. So that's the Patreon stuff. Another quick reminder that we've got a sound desk for sale. We mentioned this last week. If anyone is interested in this beautiful beast, there's a second-hand one going on Trade Me for $6,000 at the moment. I'd be happy to take a third of that, or perhaps even less, depending on what your offer is and how much I like you. So drop me a note if you want to know more about how the sound desk works. Now tonight, with the chat, I mentioned that we're going to try something just slightly different. So let's just have a quick look at that right now and see if it's still working. So what we normally do with the chats is we cut over to our chats here, and let's just have a quick look at that right now actually. So we've got YouTube and Facebook comments coming, and Ian saying, like the new starty bit. You're liking the music, Ian. Thank you, because other people are complaining about the music, but you know the deal, I can't afford any more. That music that you hear at the start is basically just the leftover stock music that I hadn't used on any other project, and it was just about all I had left to use. So if you want me to get any new music, you have to donate me money so I can afford to buy some. But Ian's saying that he's actually getting into the groove of that music now. So hi Janet, Wendy, Sarah, Dave, Ian, Harry, nice to see you guys here. Chanel, Dominic, Poison Toad, Greg, Ellen, who's here, John, Dominic, and Araha. So I figured that would be your answer. for the competition. Just Gaming, Mike, I think I've said hi to everyone there. So that's how we normally do it, and what happens during the show is we get lots of comments coming through and I start struggling to keep up with everything, and then it all kind of gets a little bit awkward while I'm sort of making funny grunting noises trying to keep up with it. And then after the show I look back and I'm always embarrassed at the things that I misread or missed altogether. So what we're going to try and do is go over to Ange and Floyd over there, and I'm going to come to you guys right now. So these guys will be keeping an eye on the chat, and what we hope to be able to do is actually have a look at their laptop screen. Now, we did try this way back in the early days of the show, but it didn't really seem to work very well. So we can only test it live, of course. So hopefully they might be able to help us out with things like this. So they've just highlighted that question from Chanel: how did Mad Mike go on Saturday? So that's working. The good news is that we're getting the YouTube one up here, but we're actually having a little bit of a problem with the Facebook one. No progress on that, guys. Okay, so at least we can keep an eye on the YouTube one now. So how did Mad Mike go on Saturday? Unfortunately, he has not yet launched. We will actually mention that again shortly when it comes to the talking about our launch schedule. So yep, we'll keep an eye on that throughout the night because I really want to get those chats going a little bit better. Right, so with our housekeeping stuff, we're almost there. I want to go back just quickly to a thing that Nat brought up, I think it was just last week, and that was a Trade Me scam alert. So Nat was talking about this shop on Trade Me, which is trying to sell you blocks of land on the Moon and Mars. And as we all know, you cannot do that. You cannot buy stuff on the Moon and Mars. And if we go and have a look at one of these auctions here, it goes down and gives you the normal nonsense about how this person had spotted a loophole in the Outer Space Treaty and has decided that that means it is legal to sell property on the Moon and Mars. It is not. It's very misleading, and I recommend that everyone go there, and I think right down the bottom somewhere, report this listing. Click on that. Don't everyone do it at once, but over the next sort of few weeks, it would be really cool if a few people could go in here and report these listings, because they are misleading at best, and I would certainly call them a scam myself. So thanks again, Nat, for pointing that one out, and go and give them a hard time. They should not be able to trade. That is, I think, there's one more bit of housekeeping that I just wanted to quickly share with you guys. This has got nothing to do with space. It's something that happened at our house last night. So about 1 o'clock this morning, we're all lying in bed trying to sleep. We hear an almighty crash outside, and Ange and I just quickly leapt out of bed, threw a few clothes on, and ran out in the rain to see what was going on, and we found this. A drunk driver missed that power pole by millimetres and smashed through the fence and hedge going through to Te Awamutu racecourse there. Unbelievable. That person is extremely lucky to be drawing breath today. Honestly, it was just incredible how close it was. But the person is all right, and the car's been hauled out now. But yeah, that was a bit of drama in the middle of the night. So I just thought I would share that with you guys because it was just so close. Can't believe it. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with space. We want to be talking about space stuff, don't we? So let us talk about some space news. First of all, we will start off talking about some launches, but I'm just going back a little bit for the first video that I want to show you. This is going back to the 8th of August. Oh, the prize. We're back to the old, Dave's forgotten to organise a prize again. So yeah, that's the news. I have not even thought about the prize. Sorry about that. So do we want to do our thing again where someone from the audience wants to go and choose a prize? Anyone feel like doing that? Okay, someone in the back there, you guys go and choose a prize. What you need to do is head out to the shop area behind me over there, probably in that part over there, and choose a prize that is worth somewhere in the sort of $20 to $30 range. Now, Janet has actually donated a whole bunch of prizes, but I thought, Janet, that we would spin those out over a few weeks so we're not just giving the same prize away every single week. So while these guys go and sort out a prize, we will get back to trying to talk about some space news. Now, as I said, I wanted to go back to a launch that was a few weeks ago now. When I can't even think of the date. It was August 8th. This was the Atlas V launch, which we briefly talked about, but we didn't say much about it. So it was a nighttime launch. A pretty cool looking launch. But I tell you what, look, I'll just tell you quickly what's happening here. So this was an early morning launch, so it's effectively nighttime here. But because it's so close to sunrise, we've actually got the sun over the horizon, and the light from the sun is coming into the upper atmosphere. So while the rocket is sort of close closer to Earth, everything is dark, but as it gets higher into the atmosphere, you can actually see things start being lit up by the sun, including all the exhaust plume, which it can make some spectacular effects. So this is the launch there. No audio with this one, unfortunately, but there it goes. So it's launching off into the night sky. But you can sort of start seeing, well, a little bit shortly probably, here's a view looking back down from the rocket. You can see all the ice over it. There's the solid rocket boosters separating and falling down there. And in the next shot here, you might actually be able to see some of those things that just sort of look like stars just floating around there. Those are the boosters falling back down. But look at this. This is amazing, isn't it? So this is the exhaust plumes being lit up by the sun. This is when it's much higher in the sky. And it makes for some spectacular views. And in this one, I'll just pause that there actually. What you're seeing here again is the shot from the rocket looking back down. And what happens is all the exhaust plumes, because the atmosphere is much thinner, there's not nearly as much air pressure way up high in the atmosphere, the exhaust plumes coming out of the bottom of the rocket disperse and go all over the place. They make that really wide dispersal pattern that you saw before. So here you're looking back down from the rocket. You can see all the exhaust plume there being lit up by the sun, and on the left there you can actually see the shadow of the rocket on the exhaust plume, the gases as they're coming out there. So let's just carry that on for a little bit. So you can see all the exhaust there, there's a shadow on the left. Now in a sec, I'll just pause it again, in a sec you're going to see the rocket seem to kind of shake a little bit. A whole lot of this ice is going to come off it, and you will see the fairing covers fall back down and go down through the exhaust plumes, and we don't normally see that lit up like this. So the fairing, if you'll recall, is the bit at the very top of the rocket that covers the payload. The payload's inside, the fairings, a couple of bits on the side, they fall away once it's up in more or less in space and expose the payload underneath. So let's just roll that video again. So I think sometime very shortly, there you go. So you see all the ice and stuff, and there's the fairings that just sort of fell away down through the plumes. Here it is again in slow motion. So you see the shadow on the left there, boof, that's the fairings splitting away and falling down, and look, going down through the exhaust plumes there as it falls back down. You could even see the shadow on the plume, so quite spectacular stuff. One last shot from the ground looking back up to it. And you can see a lot of the exhaust there looks really dark. That's back closer to the Earth, but up high enough, you can actually see that the sky is starting to light up now. Up high enough, you can actually see it all lit up. So you're kind of seeing both the nighttime and the daytime one there. Well, there's some spectacular shots there. I love that. And then just to finish off, this is a CGI view of the second stage actually up in orbit with the payload at the front there, ready to be deployed. So I thought I would share that with you, even though we're going back a few weeks there. I thought there was just some really, really cool shots in there. So I think that's all we really needed to say about that. What we do want to do now is talk about the schedule closer to now. So I'm still working on this whole system of keeping up to date with what's happening with the launches. It's turning out to be a little more difficult than I had hoped, but I think it's worth doing, and I'm sort of quite enjoying doing it. Before we look at this, the rocket on the left, who knows what that is? I'm sort of hoping that you do. I thought this would be quite a nice thing to do as well, just to see if you guys can recognize that rocket. Tell me the name of the rocket, who it is that launches it, and if you really want to show your stuff, which mission was it? There you go, there's a challenge. That might be a bit much of a challenge really. But anyway, so last week we had a couple of launches from China. The Zhilong one was just some experimental comsats, I believe, or communication satellites, I mean there. So I believe that one went okay. The other Chinese one, the ChinaSat 18, Zhongjing 18, my best pronunciation. That is the I'm mixing up my English, aren't I? Getting my languages mixed up. Chang'e, which is the Long March launch vehicle. Unfortunately, that one has had a problem. So that was launching communication satellites, but they have had a communication problem, which is not ideal with a communication satellite, so they may have lost that mission. The one most of interest to us here in New Zealand obviously was the Electron launch, which was just yesterday morning, very inconveniently in the middle of the night. Thanks for that, Rocket Lab. But anyway, everything went well there, and I think what we need to do is have a look at the Rocket Lab launch. So this was the mission called Look Ma No Hands, and it was mission number 8 for the Electron rocket and the Rocket Lab team. and everything is going very well indeed. So let's just first of all have a quick look. Wait till it clicks in. There we go. So we need some audio for this because we love hearing the countdown with a New Zealand accent. And I also quite like hearing comments from other people around the world when they're watching the New Zealand launches, making fun of the numbers. And apparently the Australians like watching it and waiting for when they hit number 6. So anyway, here we go. This is the launch.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
Sounds like a normal 6 to me, but anyway, sorry to pause it here, but you've got to listen to the audio a few seconds after launch. It happens a couple of times, just a little bit after launch and then just a little bit after that. I hope I don't blow your ears out. Check this out.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Lift off detected.
Weird, eh? It does it again.
You're getting a picture.
Sounds like Transformers, eh? What a noise. Okay, so good launch, nighttime launch again, obviously. Heads off up into the sky, everything went perfectly, no issues at all. And here we are looking at, we're about ready for the main engine cutoff there and the first stage separation. So there's the first stage on the left falling away, and on the right you see the second stage heading off to orbit with the second stage engine starting up there. So very nice. Now with that audio that you heard there, I don't know what happened, but it sounds to me like audio phasing, where you get sound waves interfering with each other. I haven't heard any other comments about it other than it sounds like a transformer. And interestingly, of course, the rocket is called Electron, which kind of sounds like a transformer's name as well. But if anyone's got any other ideas about what could have caused that really weird audio noise, my guess is that it's just audio phasing. But I'd love to hear other people's comments. Now what we're looking at here, this is a diagram that shows you what happens next after the stage separation. So what we are seeing here is the second stage. Let me just see if I can use my whiteboard here actually. So yep, here we go. That is the second stage of the rocket that we saw heading off, and that engine at the back was the one that just fired up. But then at the top of the Electron rockets, you have this thing, which is the kick stage. It's kind of like another stage with its own engine, but it's much smaller, and then the actual payload, the thing that they're putting into orbit right at the top there. And as this animation shows, we're in this stage of the mission there, where they're in quite an elliptical orbit. The reason for that is so that the second stage, when it separates, actually has quite a lot of atmospheric drag, and it will fall back down into the atmosphere, and that one will just burn up in the atmosphere, leaving the kick stage and the payload still going around. Now you have another rocket burn, another engine burn just there, and that makes the orbit more circular. So you can see that's the more circular orbit where the payload actually wants to be. So it deploys the payload, then the kick stage turns around and does a fire to slow it down, and then it will come back down to Earth. So there you go, that's how all of that works. Now the one thing that I wanted to finish off with Rocket Lab here is going back and having a look at this animation that we saw last week about the reusability. So actually I'll just leave this rolling while we talk about it. So this is Electron's big news that I got all excited about last week. What we're seeing is a computer generated animation showing how the whole process is supposed to work. So it's quite a big deal, this whole thing. So there we go, there's the Electron going up into space, and there is the first stage separation that we saw on the video there. And the first stage, the big one there on the right, now sort of drifts up a little bit actually, but then back down towards the Earth, comes back into the atmosphere. Now this does not have an entry burn. This is not a propulsive landing, so it doesn't fire any rockets or anything, it just falls down. So that means it heats up an awful lot. So heat is going to be a big problem trying to get this thing reused. So it's falling back down towards the Earth there, getting very hot indeed, and the plan is to go and catch it with a helicopter. But first of all, it deploys that thing there. Let's just, oh no, I'll keep it going. That first thing that you saw being deployed there is called a balloon. It's a cross between a balloon and a parachute. So the balloon goes first, and I suspect that will actually just be the only thing that it deploys for a while, and then it deploys the parachute. You can see the parachute over there. It's actually aerodynamic, that parachute, so it can sort of be steered. Then the helicopter comes in with a special hooking mechanism and grabs it and takes it back to the ship. It's outrageous, eh? What a plan. It's very, very cool. Now, this whole idea is actually not new. The idea of going and catching things as they fall back from space with a helicopter goes right back, in fact, believe it or not, to the 1950s. Way back when they had spy satellites and imaging satellites in space, when before digital cameras were developed, what they had was they actually had film. Up on these satellites, they took photos using film cameras, and then they were in special canisters that fell back down to the Earth when they were finished, and they went out there with helicopters and grabbed them just like that. And there's been various other attempts to try and recapture things from space using helicopters. So it's not a new thing, but it is a new thing certainly for Rocket Lab, and it comes with all sorts of problems. So all the best of luck to Rocket Lab when they try and do this. My understanding is that in a couple of missions from now, perhaps about number 10, they're going to actually start having new hardware on board. Even if it's just instrumentation. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this. There may even be instrumentation on their rockets before that, but they're going to be starting to work towards this very shortly. Now, Peter Beck, of course, has previously said that he would never attempt reusability, and that's because it's not really commercially advantageous to do that. You don't really save a lot of money with these very small rockets, like Rocket Lab's one. It's more about production schedule. So what happens is that Rocket Lab is gearing up to launch eventually once every week, but they can't make their rockets fast enough. So they're actually going to be reusing them in order to be able to produce enough rockets fast enough. So all looking pretty good. Was there anything else I wanted to say about that? One other quick thing, just the payload for their next mission apparently is going to be launched in the next week or so. I know there was one other thing that I quickly wanted to mention about Rocket Lab, and that is something that we have talked about a little bit recently, and that is their new launch facility in the United States. So this is Launch Complex 2. So the complex on Mahia Peninsula, that is LC1 or Launch Complex 1 for Rocket Lab. Launch Complex 2 is at Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia on the east coast of the United States, and that's all looking really good. They're hoping this is going to be the fastest build for any launch complex ever, and the way it's going, it's looking pretty good. So awesome, lots of encouraging, cool news coming out of Rocket Lab. So big fan, love your work, Rocket Lab, awesome. Right, so what else do we need to talk about? We need to go back to our schedule and see what was happening there. So that was the launches that have just been. Coming up, we've got the Soyuz mission very shortly. In fact, is that tomorrow morning? Where are we? Yeah, tomorrow morning I think it is. I think about 10 a.m. New Zealand time, but I can't quite remember. And that is going to be this beast. I love the Soyuz rockets. They look pretty impressive, really. So that's all on the stand, ready to go. On the launch pad. So this is an uncrewed test flight to the International Space Station. So no people on board, but they are testing out a new configuration of their rocket to get it to the space station before they actually put people on it. And as part of this, they are actually also going to be including a humanoid robot, that one there, by the name of F-850, otherwise known as Fedor. And that's going to be, it's a little bit like what's it called? Robonaut. NASA's one, Robonaut. So the idea is that if you send these robots up to the space station, they'll be able to do a lot of work that the astronauts either can't do, or they can go outside and do some stuff out there. They can help out, but they can also do stuff that might be a little bit dangerous for astronauts, and hopefully they'll have quite a few applications. I want to come back and talk about that more next week, but we don't really have time now because, yikes, it's already 7:23 and we've still got quite a lot to talk about. So that is a launch for tomorrow. Other launches coming up. We've got United Launch Alliance's Delta IV that's just launching a GPS satellite. The Starhopper. So the SpaceX Starhopper that we've been eagerly waiting for and following for months still hasn't launched. They are still waiting for FAA approval, and I think Elon Musk is being very careful, especially after he went and set fire to that whole lot of reserve land. I'm sure they're just being quite careful at the moment. So Not really sure when we can expect that, but not just yet. And then some other ones that we have talked about recently, we don't know when they're going to be launching, including poor old Mad Mike Hughes, the guy who, the on-again, off-again flat earther, who wants to launch himself in his homemade steam rocket to try and prove that the Earth is flat, although he's now saying it's not about the flat Earth thing. But unfortunately, he has not yet been able to launch, but we will certainly let you know if he does manage to get off the ground or whatever happens. So I think that's all we wanted to say about the launch schedule, what's coming up. So did anyone manage to name that rocket that was on there? Did you notice that at all? Let's have a quick look in the chats. The one that we had, where was it? The one that's on the left there. I was asking if anyone could name that rocket. I'm kind of hoping that you guys can. John's got it apparently. Alan's telling me. So anyway, if you did not get it, then...
Oh, look, Ma, no hands.
Very close. Look, Ma, no hands. The rocket itself is actually Rocket Lab's Electron rocket, but that specific one is from their last mission, which was called Make It Rain. So Rocket Lab, each of their missions, they give it a name. The rocket itself is called Electron. That mission was Make It Rain. The one that just launched was Look, Ma, no hands. So yeah, hopefully everyone can recognise New Zealand's Electron rocket. I keep saying New Zealand's. I know technically it's an American company now, but obviously we are still Kiwi as. That's right. That's what the audience is telling me. So that's where we're up to with all the rocket launches. We need to look at some other space news. Oh, hang on. No, we don't. We need to have a quick look at the chat. Is there anything that we want to talk about over there? Let's go and catch up with Ange. And what have you got over there, Ange?
Okay, so we've got a couple of things. So Dave Terry was asking when you were referring to space litter. So hang on, he's over in Facebook here.
Oh, okay then.
Back up here a wee bit.
And
he was talking about littering space. How long is Elon Musk's Tesla satellite likely to be hanging around in space?
I'm glad you asked that. Who was that asking that question? Sorry?
So Dave Terry.
Dave, thank you for asking that, Dave. I'm going to answer that question. What a coincidence. But that is actually on the program tonight. Where is the Tesla? So, cool. Maybe you already knew and you were just testing me. Okay, was there anything else?
Yep. And there was a little bit of conversation around why does it make that rocket sound. So I think it was Rasta Girl NZ asked that question. And then there was an interesting little comment from Living Multiverse saying here, he says, so interesting enough, I had a phone call that was intercepted with that same sound. And other really weird transformer sounds, like when they talk to each other. I have saved the audio as I was recording.
Okay.
So kind of weird. And then he goes on to say, recording on my laptop some art. So yeah, so he's like aliens.
Nice. Yeah. So as I said before, I'm not entirely sure, but it does sound like audio phasing. So that's when you get any kind of waves that interfere with each other, you get this interfering pattern. You can do it with water waves. You can do it with any kind of waves, including sound waves. So that would be my best guess. It sounded like audio phasing to me. But if anyone else wants to offer anything else, you just go for your life. Okay, thanks for that, guys. Now we want to talk about some other space news. Oh no, quickly, but just before we do, quick update of the competition. Should we nuke Mars? If you think we should or should not nuke Mars, write comp and your answer and any reasons if you want to in either the live chat or the Facebook comments. Okay, Floydie, what have we got here? Oh, still haven't told them the prize. Thank you very much for that. You guys went and made such a good effort with the prize. So, right, what we have got here, it is, this is one of those, a ball, isn't it? It's a high bouncing ball. So you make it up yourself. It gets these, you've got these little things in there, these little plastic things that you fill it up with all the chemicals and you make high bouncing balls. It's a lot of fun. So that is the prize this week, and we might even chuck in another little something with it. We'll see how we feel. So thanks very much, guys, for choosing that prize for us today. Awesome. Now, the first bit of news that I want to talk about with the general space news is actually nothing to do with space, and I didn't really want to talk about this, but a few people have been asking me and asking if I could just do a quick mention of it. So, yeah, you guys are in charge. I'm just going to quickly mention this. This was that explosion in Russia. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this, but at this missile test site in northern Russia, there was an explosion last week. Really nasty stuff, actually. There's nothing enjoyable about reporting this story at all. So we don't know a lot about it except that they were apparently testing a nuclear-powered missile, which is, to be clear, this is not a nuclear warhead. It's not a nuclear bomb, although it could have a nuclear bomb on it, presumably, but it's a nuclear-powered missile, and the reason you would want to do that is so that it has basically an unlimited range. So I started looking into this a little bit. Now it's called, the NATO crew have nicknamed it Skyfall. That's the designation that they've given it. But the more I learned about this thing, the more upset I got. It's just basically this missile that just continuously just fly all around the world, evading detection and just looking for somewhere to drop itself. So what a depressing story. So something exploded. There was a spike in nuclear radiation. Reports were that there were between 5 and 8 fatalities. People in the local town were all going out and buying iodine tablets. So yeah, to be honest, I don't really know anything more about it than that. And as I say, it's not actually even about space, really. But interestingly, in the last week, 4 nuclear monitoring stations that are supposed to be around Russia monitoring for nuclear explosions, 4 of them mysteriously stopped working in the last week and weren't able to detect anything or do their job. So gee, Russia, that's a lot of bad luck in 1 week, isn't it? So look, I can't really say much more about it, and to be honest, I don't want to. So let's talk about something more happy. What else have we got next? So, I know, now let's see, I think I've got a picture here to support this one. This was something that we talked about a few weeks ago. You might remember this. This is the SpaceX CRS-18 mission from memory. This is the one that had quite a few interesting payloads in it, and you may recall that one of them was the International Docking Adapter, and that was at the bottom of the Dragon capsule in the trunk part at the back of it. You remember it's the bit that I said was exposed to the vacuum of space. We saw the payload deployment, and I said, look in the back there, that's the docking adapter that you can see there, and there'll be a spacewalk later on to actually install that on the space station. Well, that spacewalk is happening in just a few hours, at about 10:30, actually 3 hours from now, New Zealand time. You will be able to, if you want to, you'll be able to go to NASA TV and watch that spacewalk, or EVA. That stands for Extravehicular Activity, the technical term for a spacewalk, where they will go out and install it. Now, these things don't happen quickly. Spacewalks take forever. And I'm going to show you an animation that NASA has put out that previews what happens in that mission. So don't worry too much about trying to follow what goes on here. The link's in the show notes if you want to go and look at it. The whole thing's about 7 minutes long, and it does have a voiceover so you know what they're talking about. But this kind of gives you an idea of all the things they have to do during this EVA to get it installed. And it's just on the top there. Actually, look, let me just pause that video there, and I think my whiteboard is still working. That bit there, that's the bit that we're talking about. So that's the bit that we saw back here. That's the bit that was in the trunk part of the Dragon, and you can see it there installed, but these astronauts are out there like connecting all the cables and doing all the other bits and pieces to get it working. So I'm not sure how long the EVA is scheduled for, but around about 8 hours is pretty common. So you can see all the different things they've got to do getting all around the station. So if you want to go and preview that, go and check it out, link in the show notes. But otherwise, I'd say there's a pretty good chance that we will have just a brief summary of how all of that went next week. So the point of this docking adapter that they are installing there is to be able to accommodate different kinds of spaceships, in particular the SpaceX Crew Dragon, when that goes there, and Boeing's Starliner. I better just check my notes here to make sure I'm getting all of this right. Yeah, Boeing's CST-100 Starliner and SpaceX's Crew Dragon. So hopefully that will be all good to go by the time those rockets are launching with people. Now, there was one other thing that was supposed to happen with this EVA that apparently is not now happening, and I don't know why, but I'm a bit upset about it. And let me show you a picture. You know that every now and again I post these videos of New Zealand from space or other views of Earth from space from the space station. Those come from a project with 4 cameras mounted outside the space station, pointing back down towards the Earth, and anyone can go and access those live video feeds. I'm sure heaps of you have done, but if you tried to go and have a look at that feed recently, what you would have seen instead of the video feed is this message saying that it's experiencing technical issues. So those cameras have been down for about, well, it must be at least 2 weeks now, so that's a bit upsetting. That's my favourite live feed from space, and we use it in the Space Centre here actually, so I'll just go out to the audience camera here. That screen right at the very back there, you can kind of see it says live video from space. That normally shows that feed, but it's been down. So, just absolutely gutted about that. And to be honest, I can't really see it's a high priority for NASA to try and fix this. So, I hope they get it back online. Be really upset if that's the end of that project. If it is, what we need to do is we need to organise a crowdfunding thing and hire Rocket Lab to put our own camera up in space so that we can keep it going. But I'll give you any updates if we hear anything about that. So in fact, there is actually a link in the show notes that gives you more information about this whole project and some status updates. Okay, let's talk about some other stuff. So yes, let's talk about what is happening at NASA, because there's quite a big announcement that has just come from NASA. And what's happened, this is to do with the Artemis program, so the program to get the first woman and the next men back to the moon. And NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine made an announcement in the last week, or just a couple of days ago, isn't it, about who's going to be leading the program to get the landing and ascent part, so the part to actually get people from the moon's orbit down to the moon and back up again. And the big news is that that has gone to Marshall Space Flight Center, which is one of NASA's facilities. Now, to help illustrate that, what I've actually gone and done is I've gone and made up a map showing some of, I think this is pretty much all, or the main NASA facilities in the United States. While I was doing this, I was reminded of the conversation we had last week about where are all the facilities, the launch facilities and space facilities around the world. And I thought it would actually be a really good idea to just make up one on Google Maps and show them all, because I couldn't actually really find one. So I've only just started with NASA's ones here, but my idea is to actually go and put all the launch facilities around the world, so we've got a nice little handy map to go and refer to when we are talking about all these different places. In the meantime, what's going on is that if we have a look at a couple of NASA facilities, this one down here, Houston, Texas, is Johnson Space Center, and that was the NASA facility that led the Apollo lunar landing project, so that part of it for the Apollo missions. And I think it's fair to say that we sort of expected that they would probably lead the one for the upcoming one as well. However, NASA has instead given it to Marshall Space Flight Center over there in Alabama, which will have upset a few people, and it's a surprising decision. So there's a lot of politics involved in here, and I'm wondering how I can quickly summarize all of this. So the US Senator, the politician, or one of the politicians, the Senator for Alabama, is a guy by the name of Richard Shelby. He's well known in the space industry because he is a big supporter of NASA's SLS rockets. And so if we go back to, when was it? Was it about March? Remember when I said, and I showed you a quick video of Jim Bridenstine going to a Senate committee and telling them that he thought NASA would be considering commercial rockets instead of SLS. And as you can imagine, Richard Shelby was surprised and very upset about that. He was apparently very, very angry about the whole thing, as we kind of expected he would be. But of course, now that they've got this going to Alabama, he's presumably much happier about that. But the senators from Texas are now very angry and upset that they have not got it. And those senators are one, John Cornyn, I think I pronounced that right, I don't know him, and Ted Cruz, who's much more well known. Yes, they are reportedly surprised and very unhappy. And a lot of people have been really critical about this, and I can understand why, because this is splitting up the whole thing between two different facilities. And this goes back to that whole discussion about the way NASA is sort of spread out over the United States. This goes right back to the early days of NASA. So part of the way to sell the whole Apollo program going to the moon to the American public and politicians was to say that we will spread the work out all around the country so everyone gets some of that money. And that was a really good idea, but it does mean that you've got this sort of rather inefficient system of spreading it all over the place, and then you've got all of these politicians all around America who will fight tooth and nail to keep their facilities. And there's a lot of argument that the reason that we've still got SLS and it's still based on old technology and everything is because the politicians just refuse to let their facilities be shut down or change significantly. So yeah, it's all very political, I know, but it's really interesting. And we'll wait and see if there's a lot more reaction about that. Yikes, the time's getting on. We need to keep moving on. But I just wanted to mention another thing, unrelated actually, but it's about Marshall Space Flight Center. They're giving away an old rocket. Look at this. NASA is giving away an Apollo-era Saturn rocket to anyone who can afford to pay to get it taken away. Wow, eh? The bad news, first of all, although it didn't explicitly say so, I think it's very safe to assume that this will only be American places that will be able to get it. So we're talking about museums and things like that. And if you have a look at NASA's website, they've actually got a whole thing talking about how they distribute their artifacts and how you can apply to get one of their artifacts. Again, it doesn't actually specifically say that you have to be American, but generally speaking, you do. Now, the cost of moving this thing is estimated to be around about $500,000 to move it somewhere in the States. Have no idea what it would cost to move it to New Zealand. I don't think we'd fit this out the back of the Space Centre here, to be perfectly honest. I'd be willing to give it a try. But anyway, look, as it happens, I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. Going back quite a while, I was actually in the early stages of negotiating to get an old NASA rocket, believe it or not. It was quite fortuitous, but it never happened, of course. But there was an institution that had an old, genuine NASA rocket, smaller than one of these things. I think it was about 15 to 20 meters long. And I was actually offered to get this thing for the Space Centre here. So I went through the process, but having a look at the contract, there were a few problems. I had to put it in a special building of its own, so we would have had to have built quite a big building for it. There were issues with insurance and stuff like that. But it wasn't outrageous, and the cost of the whole thing was sort of like, wow, we could do a crowdfunding thing and maybe get this thing so we could have a real NASA rocket right here in Kiki. What was the showstopper was that in the contract, NASA says that if for some reason they ever want it back, I have to ship it back to them immediately at my cost. So I figured out how much that was going to cost, and it was about the price of our house, actually. So that put paid to that whole idea. So we came so close to having a NASA rocket, but it didn't happen. Sorry about that, everyone. We'll look at something a little bit smaller. One last thing I wanted to say about the whole moon thing and stuff. I only just heard this afternoon. Newt Gingrich, a fairly well-known American politician, is trying to sell Trump on a completely different, much cheaper plan to get people back to the moon. He's essentially saying ditch the whole Artemis program altogether and we'll just have a contest between a couple of the major players. So SpaceX, Boeing, or Blue Origin, whatever. A bizarre thing this there. He's got a really eclectic group of people with him to try and promote this idea, including an ex-Michael Jackson publicist and a few other very strange, well, I shouldn't say strange people, that's a bit unfair. I can't see that plan flying. Although I have to say, to be fair, President Trump is a little bit unpredictable. It is quite possible that he could actually be sold on this plan, but for those political reasons that we were talking about before, I just cannot see Congress buying into that plan for 1 minute. So I think at this stage, we're definitely all still on track. So let's see, how are we going in the chat over there? We've got any other stuff over there to talk about, Ange? Bear with me, let's come over and see what's going on over there.
Okay, so in the YouTube comments, we've got a couple of interesting comments. So Rob U Music, so this is his one just here. Oh, whoops, it didn't highlight the whole lot for me. It's a bit sluggy. Saying the latest Rocket Lab flight had a sensor package on board for recording re-entry, pre-block and 2 launches. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Thanks for that, Rob.
the competition tonight, mostly people are saying no for the obvious reasons of not contaminating the planet and leave it alone, it's not ours to wreck. But there are a couple of yeses that have come in. Jay Harris said, yes, Mars needs liberation, nuke the sunburnt planet and get some radioactive bacteria. Thought that was kind of funny. And also, there was another one just down a bit. Sorry, I'm doing the R thing now. Poison Toad was the other one. And he said, if we can establish for a certainty that there's no endemic life on Mars, then why not try a nuclear solution, at least to melt the caps? So I thought that was a pretty good comment there. On a lighter note, I like Casey's comment. I wonder how the tardigrades are going on the moon, because the Russian stuff was very depressing.
It was. Thank you for all those comments. Right, starting at the end, the tardigrades. Next week, I'm going to do a rant about them. There you go. So that'll please our crowd who loves me getting upset. So yeah, we'll get back to the tardigrades next week. We don't expect them to be doing very well, to be honest. Now, what were the other comments there? No, we'll get back to the nuclear thing in just a moment, and thank you everyone for all those other comments you had there. So, look, let's move along there because we are about to talk about Mars, actually. So, we need to whiz through some of these things. Fortunately, they are all quick stories, I think. First of all, quick update on Mars 2020. A robotic toolkit has been added. As you know, I like to just do a little quick update each few weeks or however often it happens. This is still a year away from launch, the Mars 2020 mission, the robotic mission to Mars. But this is their assembly or the carousel of drill bits that's just been added to it. So that's really all we need to say about that. But there's a couple of other things about Mars. So NASA and ESA, which is the European Space Agency, have been talking about their proposal to get a sample return mission from Mars, and that includes the Mars 2020 mission, which is launching next year. So the idea with this is that, first of all, the Mars 2020 rover, as it moves around, is actually going to grab some samples and cache them in special containers to be picked up later and actually brought back to Earth, which would be absolutely amazing. You can, like, the rover itself will be able to perform certain measurements and observations and experiments to learn about the stuff on Mars, but really you can't beat getting it coming back to Earth so we can actually analyze it in a proper Earth lab. So it's a really long, complicated process, this whole thing. If we go down here, there's a couple of graphics. This shows you some of the various vehicles that would be involved in it. If we go down, that's it launching back to come back towards Earth. So I think this one right down here, it's a bit complex. We won't go too much through the whole thing. But essentially what happens is that the Mars 2020 is launching next year. It will go to Mars. It will drive around on Mars and leave these little samples ready to be collected for later on. Another mission will go all the way to Mars and go around and pick them all up, bring them back to that launch thing that we saw before and launch them back up into Mars orbit and bring them all the way back to Earth. It's a long, involved process, isn't it? That's a lot of mission to go through just to get some samples back. I'm a little bit in two minds about the whole thing. A sample return mission would be absolutely outstanding. I love the idea. It's going to be in the 2030s, if it actually all works at all. It's going to be in the 2030s by the time they actually get them back to Earth. That's quite a long time to wait, and if you believe Elon Musk, he's going to have people there by then anyway. So I'm not 100% sold on it, but I do think it's a good idea, because it'll probably take longer for people to get there than the 2030s, and so we'll keep going with it. It just seems, I don't know, my gut feeling is that there's a lot of money, a lot of risk in there. Any one of these things goes wrong and it's not going to work. But still, I think on the whole, I am a fan of the mission. Was there any other thing in my notes about that? Nah, 2032, they're saying they hope to return it. A quick update on, it's not really so much an update, but this is the thing about the methane on Mars that we refer to occasionally. Now, this story was widely reported as scientists one step closer to figuring out what the methane on Mars is about. If you haven't been watching the show, if you're new to this stuff, it's the question about what is the methane on Mars? We think we found methane in the atmosphere on Mars. Is it a sign of life, or is it something just to do with the geography? So I got a little bit excited about this one, but as it turns out, what they're saying is this team was saying, look, everyone's talking about all these possible sources of the methane, but everyone has ignored the idea that it could actually be caused by wind erosion. So we looked into it and we discovered that it's not wind erosion. So to me, that's not really a step forward. Well, it was a step forward in thinking it, and then it's a step back in deciding that it wasn't. I suppose it's progress. They have ruled out one thing, but it's probably not as interesting as a lot of the headlines have made out. Now, last thing, almost the last thing, a couple of things still about Mars. Elon Musk tweeted this in the last week. Nuke Mars, 2 words, Nuke Mars. And he followed it up with some t-shirts and some other strange things that he likes to do. So the idea with nuking Mars, the reason that you would want to do that is, I've already forgotten who it was, sorry, said in the comments, the reason you would want to do that is you would drop a thermonuclear device over one of the poles, and the idea is that you heat up a lot of the carbon dioxide that's in the form of ice at the moment and release it into the atmosphere, and that would help to terraform Mars or turn it into a more Earth-like planet. At least helps to, well, I guess it's not really going to warm it up immediately, but the idea is with all this new carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you would have a thicker atmosphere, which would help in many ways and would help warm the planet, carbon dioxide, of course. And so that's a part in the terraforming idea. It has some merit, the idea, although other studies have shown that it's probably not going to work. I think the jury's still out on this one as to whether it would actually work or not. I'm sure it would help somewhat in the whole terraforming idea, but I think that most of the studies that I've seen seem to indicate that there's actually not going to be enough carbon dioxide there to really make much difference anyway. And let's be honest, the big thing here is, who on earth is going to agree to Elon Musk dropping nuclear bombs on Mars? That's just, politically, it's just not going to fly, is it? So anyway, that's what that is all about. If you haven't already entered and said whether or not you think we should be dropping nukes on Mars, go and get into that right now. So I'm going to try and avoid just stumbling through all of the chat here tonight. We're going to try and leave that with Ange a little bit more, but we do appreciate all your comments there. Right, we need to answer this question. Where is the Tesla? You remember that? So Elon Musk launched one of his cars into space. It was just a test mission, and that. Oh, look, let me show you this website. This is actually a private website that just some joker has set up that is tracking the Tesla as it is orbiting the sun. So you can actually see it. I think you can sort of see it there. Where are we? This is Earth over here, and this is it over here right now. So it's on the other side of the Earth, but it has now completed one orbit. You could say it's 1 year old, I suppose, in its journey through space. So you can see the orbit there. So this is the orbit of the Earth. Venus here, Earth, and Mars out here. So it's a funny kind of orbit. It sort of goes, it's a bit of an elliptical orbit, goes out here and back again. So it comes quite close to the Earth. And out past Mars, sort of into the asteroid belt there. So that's where it is right now. Was it Dave, I think, that asked that question?
Sorry about Tesla,
yeah, so there you go. That's where it is. It's coming back round, it's coming back near the Earth's orbit, but it is on the other side of the sun right now, and it has now completed one orbit. It's a cool website. Go through, it's got heaps and all this data down here is continuously updating. See, it's pretty cool. He's done an awesome job of that. Nice. Now, one last thing about Mars. Remember, you can send your name to Mars on that Mars 2020 mission. Who in our audience has sent their name to Mars? Oh, what a good one. Awesome. Well done, guys. Floyd, your name's on the way to Mars as well. So's mine. Yep, very cool. So the link is in the show notes if you want to do that. So you just go and sign up, and your name will be digitally sent to Mars with the Mars 2020 mission. Yikes, we're getting near the end of our time, and there's still stuff that we haven't even talked about. Let's quickly whiz through some of these ones, because there's not too many more left to go. Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's space tourism company, has opened the doors to their gateway to space, which is essentially just a bunch of bars, I think. This is at the Spaceport America in New Mexico, so you can kind of have a look down here. This is where you go while you're waiting to go on your trip into space. Have a few beers to calm your nerves before you head off. It's all looking pretty good. You know, I was I was a bit down on Virgin Galactic for a while there after they had those problems, and it looked like Blue Origin and SpaceX was going to overtake them. But it's actually looking not too bad for them now because, well, Blue Origin, I think, is probably their biggest threat at the moment. But we'll see where that goes. Hopefully they are going to be launching before too long. Here's another company with another vehicle. This is the Dream Chaser. Haven't spoken about them much lately, but this is that kind of mini space shuttle looking vehicle. It's got a long storied history, this one. It's been all over the place. It's been owned by different companies. It had a couple of setbacks. When NASA announced some funding for spacecraft to get to the International Space Station and back, it was sort of predicted that these guys had a good shot, but it went to Boeing and SpaceX instead, so these guys missed out, and it looked like it may have all been over. But they're back in business now. They've been given more money, and so it was originally proposed to carry people on it, and I think they will get there again, but at the moment it's just an uncrewed one, so it's basically for taking supplies to and from the space station. Here's a few photos of it down here. It's cool looking craft. It's a really awesome looking thing. Yeah, as I say, sort of like a mini space shuttle, really. It's called the Dream Chaser. Now, they announced this week that they have found a launch vehicle. So this doesn't fly up into space like that. It's not like a plane that just goes all the way to space. It launches on a rocket. So it'll need a launch vehicle to get it up there, but it lands like a plane, like the space shuttle did, basically. So they have announced that their launch vehicle is going to be this one, which is still under development actually, but this is the Vulcan. So this is ULA's actually, the United Launch Alliance, which does the Atlas IV and Delta IV rockets. They're developing this one, and this is an old configuration, but they're hoping to launch 2021, I think it is. So on this view here, you see all the different parts of the rocket, and the part that where the vehicle would be with this bit here, that's the payload there. So the Dream Chaser would go there, and that's what's going to launch it. So they are hoping that they will be launching in, did I say 2021? Yes. Okay, so this rocket here, by the way, will replace the Atlas V and the Delta IV rockets that we've seen in our launch schedule. So there we go, that's that one. Right, I want to get down to some 5 to 8. We might go a bit over time, guys, tonight. Hopefully not too far, but I wanted to do just a couple of quick astronomy stories as well. Here's an interesting one. Signs that Jupiter was mixed by a gas giant. So this was a paper that was just published in Nature, in the Nature journal. So this is the idea. Well, let me just go down and show you this graphic here. What we're seeing here, these are some cutaways of what we think is inside the planet Jupiter. So you can imagine the middle of Jupiter being here, and this sort of being, the closest that you get to a surface of a gas giant. So imagine a big circle there. And what we expect to find is a very dense core in here, and then basically the gas out here, or it could be liquid sort of around here coming out to a gas, mostly helium and hydrogen. What we actually find over here, we think, this is the Juno spacecraft, the robotic spacecraft that has been orbiting Jupiter, and it has found that it appears that the core of Jupiter isn't quite as small and dense as we were thinking it would be. That's what everyone was expecting, I think, but rather all that stuff that we expect in the core, the heavier elements, are sort of more mixed throughout the planet. Well, that's weird. Why would that be? So these scientists have proposed something that could have caused that. They are proposing that a long time ago, a smaller protoplanet, or a planetary embryo, they've called it here, actually smashed into Jupiter, and that's what has mixed it all up. So quite a fascinating study there. So there's no direct evidence that this happened. It's indirect evidence. What they're proposing is something that could have caused it. So obviously I think we would be looking for more research to be done into this to see if that is a likely cause for what happened there. But some fascinating stuff coming out of that Juno mission. Right, and a quick thing about Jupiter as well. This is cool. The Europa Clipper mission, that's a NASA mission proposed to go to the moon of Jupiter, Europa, that has been given final clearance and the go-ahead for all the final design to make that happen. Still years and years away from actually happening, but good news that it's starting to look almost certain, I'll cross my fingers, that mission is actually going to go ahead. Let's head much further out into space. And it looks like scientists have detected a black hole swallowing a neutron star. So this is a computer rendering of what we might be talking about here, a black hole over there and a neutron star here. So a neutron star is one of those small, very, very dense stars made up basically of neutrons. So a neutron star is, you could think of it as a failed black hole, actually. It's kind of like, it's the leftover of an exploding star, but there's not quite enough mass to condense down into a black hole. This is kind of the next closest thing to a black hole. So extremely dense. I can't remember the exact measurements, but it's one of those ones, you've probably seen it in random space facts, where a teaspoon of it would weigh so many million kilograms or something like that. So, what they think they've done is that they have detected one of these neutron stars being swallowed by a black hole, which, if true, would be the first time we've ever actually recorded this kind of system, a black hole and a neutron star together. So we have previously discovered black holes merging. We have previously seen neutron stars colliding, but we have never seen so far a black hole and a neutron star. So pretty cool. Hope that turns out to be a real thing. Okay, so I think we're getting near all of the main news that I wanted to talk about. The other things can wait till next week. Right, we need to go and have another look at the chat. How's everything going in Chatland over there, Ange?
It's quietened off a little bit,
Yep.
but Mike Sigley had a interesting question. Is there actually a law to stop Elon Musk nuking Mars himself?
Look, what a good question. I tell you what, I'll try and include this when I have a rant about the tardigrades next week. We are severely lacking in laws in general when it comes to outer space. In fact, really the only thing we've got is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, and it just doesn't cover this sort of stuff well enough at all. Now, I'm going on memory here, but the Outer Space Treaty does talk about weapons in space. But back then, they weren't really thinking about private companies. So really, the overview is that at least according to most interpretations that I've seen, is that governments are responsible for anything that comes out of their country effectively. So you could say that the United States government is legally obliged to monitor anything that private companies do in the United States out in space. So I'm not 100% certain about this, but I would imagine that you could argue that the Outer Space Treaty would actually prevent Elon Musk sending nuclear weapons into space. Not 100% sure about that, but I think that would cover that. But generally speaking, the Outer Space Treaty is really weak, it's really vague, it doesn't deal well with private companies at all, and we are desperately in need of a better legal system for dealing with stuff in space. So a really good question. I'm not actually sure if anyone really knows. There's no actual precedence or anything for this sort of stuff. And as I say, go and look up the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. It's hopelessly vague, really. So that was all we needed to talk about with the chat, was it? Pretty much? Okay. Good as gold. A few other things to wrap it up before we come back to the competition. We're all looking good for the competition, are we? Before we do that, you may recall, I'm not quite sure when we talked about this, remember New Zealand is getting to name a planet, an exoplanet, a planet going around another star. And I said, keep an eye out because there's a group in New Zealand that is setting up the competition on behalf of the International Astronomical Union, and I said I would let you know when we had more details, when the competition actually is in place and we are ready to go. That has now happened. The link is in the show notes. You go to this page and go down and read all about exactly how it works. Do read the rules, it's quite important, but anyone can make a submission. It's pretty much as we were expecting. So yeah, it's all pretty straightforward there. It says use either English or Te Reo. My suggestion would be probably to go with something Māori, unless you've got something else really good, because I suspect that the IAU, the International Astronomical Union, would prefer to go with Indigenous names for all of these things all around the world. But anyway, if you want to suggest a name for New Zealand's planet, and actually I think I saw in here that they were talking about naming the star as well. Yeah, suggest two names, one for the planet and one for the star. So it's the star and the planet. So there you go, link in the show notes, go and do that. One more. Oh, no, look, there's a couple more things. Bear with me, guys. I meant to talk about this with Jupiter before, but I forgot about it. Sorry about that. Hubble Space Telescope has just released this beautiful new picture of Jupiter. Look at that. Fantastic, glorious colour. Love it. Now, the great red spot has been changing. And in recent times, it's actually getting a bit smaller by the looks of it. And there's quite a bit going on with all of these weather bands around here, with the way it's all moving and this whole sort of new stream coming out here. So it's quite fascinating. Now, these weather bands are moving all the time. And what I'd like to do is, just bear with me while I do this, I want to show you an old video. This is going back to the Voyager 1 missions, right back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I want to show you this video. This is a fascinating a time-lapse video that involved some very clever image processing, but these are based on real images that shows you how the weather bands actually move on Jupiter. And you can see they're not all moving in the same direction. They're going all over the place. Some are going east, some are going west. And so you can actually see around the red spot there, you can sort of see that swirling around it, and some of it is sort of coming in from the north around and then back out the other direction even. So that's I love that little video there. It really gives you an idea of exactly how everything is working. So just back to the image there, that is the latest view of Jupiter. Now the colours, don't worry too much about the colours. You can see this one is much more or much less saturated. It's actually quite hard to image the colours on Jupiter well. I think that one there is reasonably close to what you would expect to see with your own eyes. So beautiful image of Jupiter coming from the Hubble Space Telescope. We will wrap it up with one last thing before the competition. One piece of news for all you Kerbal Space Program fans, and I know there's quite a few of you out there. This is a big announcement for you. Kerbal Space Program 2 has not been released. It's still a long way away, but yes, they're jumping straight to version 2. Go and look it up. There's actually, I've got a link in the show notes of the trailer. So it's not gameplay footage, but it's fascinating. This is a big change for Kerbal Space Program. I see Scott Manley's made a video about it. I haven't watched his video. I haven't seen anything else about it, actually, to be honest, other than the trailer and a couple of small comments. But if you're into Kerbal Space Program, which is an amazing program that teaches you how rockets work and teaches you all about orbital mechanics and stuff, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It's a fantastic program. So that's really exciting news for all the KSP fans. One other quick thing I will mention is that in the show notes, I like to do a suggested links thing down the bottom, and I keep forgetting about it the last couple of weeks. I've got it in the show notes there. There's one, actually I'll just quickly go through Tim Minchin and Brian Cox singing the Galaxy song. You know, the one from Monty Python? It was The Meaning of Life, wasn't it, that was on? Fantastic song that talks about how everything is in the universe. They do a version of that song which is quite entertaining. You should go and watch that. And a couple of other links there suggested by viewers, so thank you very much for those, guys. Okay, we need to talk about the competition. We need to get that done. How are we looking with the competition, guys? All good? We're ready to do a draw?
Yep, ready.
Okay, so who wants to draw a name out of the astronaut helmet for the competition tonight? Okay, so just bring it up the front there, Floyd, and we'll get the competition drawn. And while you do that, I'll just double check that I don't have anything else to urgently talk about tonight. It's too late anyway. We're going to leave it till next week. So please remember, everyone, to like and subscribe and do all of that kind of stuff, because it really does make a big difference to us. In the meantime, congratulations, Wendy Bellhouse. You guys have won the high bouncing ball here, and maybe we might throw something else in there as well. We'll see how we're feeling. So, unless anyone out in the audience, did you guys have anything else that you wanted to talk about tonight or bring up? No, everyone is happy. So thank you very much, guys, for coming along and joining us on another cold winter night. Thank you, Floyd and Ange over there in the back, for helping us out. I think it's kind of went okay with the chat there, but it's something that we still need to keep working on. While I think about it, the Google Hangouts, what I'm hoping to do is that we will actually get that integrated with the same system. So instead of me trying to deal with it here, we'll actually get those guys to organise it, and we can bring it in. And hopefully sometime shortly, we will have a couple of test episodes separate from Space Dave Live, so we can give that a go. So I will just have one quick last look at the chat myself. and say thank you very much for everyone going in and joining in the chat. I will try and go through and see if there's anything that really needs answering, and I'll put a comment or two in the YouTube comments underneath the video if there's anything outstanding there. Space fence, Jay, the space fence. I have made a note of that, but I couldn't remember who had asked for it. I'll put that on my notes again tonight to have a quick chat about that at some stage. Thank you very much everyone for joining in. Love you guys. Awesome. We'll see you back here same time next week. Yes, we are going to be doing a show next week, and we may even next week have a little bit more of an update about what's happening with the show, because we're up to about 6 months. So that's it. Thank you to our crowd here tonight. Thank you everyone else. See you again same time next week. Bye bye.